All right, today's episode is a little different. I am celebrating 200 podcast episodes. If you would have told me in September of 2020 that I would reach 200 episodes and I would interview all the people that I've interviewed, I would not have believed you. I had to teach myself how to podcast, how to produce a podcast, how to do the show notes, all of it when I first started out. And I just thought if I can get 10 or 20 episodes out, that would be great. And then people started listening, and more people started listening, and people started to contact me about interviewing them and coming on to the podcast. So I've been very blessed. It's been a wonderful 4 years of podcasting. And I'm going to talk about some of the milestones today, and then a little bit about my personal life. So thanks for submitting the questions that you did. They're really fun. I think this is going to be a really fun episode for me and fun for you to listen to also and learn a little bit more about me and the whole, how I go about podcasting. I will say at this point in the podcast, I get probably daily, sometimes multiple times a day, people are soliciting to get on my podcast, and some of them are people I am very excited about, and some I'm like, this does not pertain to my podcast, my topics, and nothing. Obviously, you haven't done your homework and you haven't looked at what my podcast is even all about. So, but it didn't start out that way, that's for sure. I kind of started my podcast out with it was more about interviewing the people who had gone through my programs and adapted the lifestyle that I was teaching and a lot of their success stories. And that was great. And I still do those. I haven't had a lot of success stories on lately just because, like I said, I get solicited by so many people, and the topics, so many of them are so interesting. And I want to bring the guest experts on. But I do have some success stories in the pipeline because I know that those are crowd pleasers and favorites. And we love to hear somebody who's turned their health around, turned their life around, and how they did it, and what we can take and adapt from them and learn from them, because we're all in this together with the learning process. Obviously, if you've been listening to me and my podcast from the very beginning, like I'm always learning. Bringing more people on, and I'll talk more about, my whole health journey a little bit. There's a couple questions that pertain to that, but I'm really excited to bring you this 200th episode. I do have to say, in 2024, probably starting around March to July-ish, I toyed with the idea of stopping recording podcast episodes and not bringing on more guests, and just, shutting down the whole process, because I was in a really stressful time of my life, and it was all I could do just to get a podcast episode to you, the listeners, every week. And I think there's just been a couple of weeks that I didn't get an episode out since I started. But for the most part, they've been weekly from September of 2020. So I am so thrilled that I stuck with it. Like I said, I almost shut it down so many times. And I've just done a lot of really big pivots this year. And thanks for bearing with me and trusting in me, and trusting the fact that I'm going to continue to bring you people who I know you want to hear from, and that have some sort of, golden nugget for you to hear that will pertain to your life and that you can implement. So let's get started. The first question, I love this question. I'm so glad somebody asked it, because I didn't even have to think for more than 2 seconds about my answer to this. It just like right away popped into my head, and I didn't have to think long and hard about this at all. So question is, if you could interview anyone dead or alive, who would it be? I would hands down interview Jesus. I'm not afraid to say that I am a Christian, and that Jesus and the Bible, God, the afterlife, all of it, creation, is a huge part of my life, more so now than it ever has been. And it was in January of 2023 that I really dedicated my life to God and Jesus and started to follow more of a Christian lifestyle. So oh my gosh, if I could interview Jesus, that would be so amazing. Oh my goodness. I can't even imagine it, but that's definitely who I would interview. I don't know what I would ask him at this point, but I'll meet him at some point, and I'm so thrilled about that. But I do have to say, just a little sidebar. I've been watching The Chosen. For any of you who maybe want to get closer to God, and it follows the Bible, and it's basically about Jesus's ministry, and huge, so if you haven't heard of The Chosen, you've probably been living under a rock, but I'm so enamored with that series. And I watched most of the episodes last winter with my youngest son, Sam, who's now 16, and he was completely enthralled with the series as well. But it just brings to light the biblical characters during Jesus's ministry. But I'm so excited that season 4 is out. We've started to watch that. But what I wanted to say is I am so enthralled and enraptured with Jonathan Rumi, who plays Jesus. Every time he comes on, I'm like, oh, there he is. So I figure, oh my gosh, if I'm this, drawn to an actor on the screen who is playing the role of Jesus, I can't even imagine what I do when I meet him for real. So anyway, that is who I would interview. So great question. The second question is, how has podcasting impacted your personal life? And this is really interesting. I did have to think about this one for a few minutes. And I will say in this last month, I've interviewed more people than I have in a very long time. I've had about 9 or 10 podcast interviews over the last month or so. And it might not sound like a lot or seem like a lot, but it is. Like, you have to prepare for it. You can't just hop on and be like, hey, how you doing? And start. Like, at least I, as a podcaster, I have to, I look at their background, who they are. I try to listen to other podcast interviews that they've been on so I can get a feel for their personality and their background, what they would like to talk about, what they would like me to ask them about, because I've been on a number of podcasts as a guest expert, and some of them have a really great flow. And, I get done, I'm like, oh, we talked about some really great topics. I know people are going to get a lot out of this interview. And then there's other times where I'm like, oh, I wish they would have asked me, like they just kind of have a canned list of questions that they're asking. And I feel like I didn't get to say the things that I wanted to say. So there's a lot of prep work that goes into it. And a lot of times I am interviewing authors, if you listen, that. And, like just yesterday, for example, or 2 days ago, it was now, I interviewed 2 authors in 2 days. So it's like, you have to get a feel for their book and what they're talking about, and, bring out some good conversation, and try to read the book as much as you can before you interview. So there's a lot of prep work that goes into it. But how has it impacted my personal life? I feel like I'm more confident. I've met so many amazing people through my podcast and interviewing people for my podcast. And I've gotten connected to people I've never in my wildest dreams thought I would be connected to. And I feel like they're friends. And there's just a huge pool of people that I feel like I can draw from and connect with and ask questions of, who are now in my community and in my network that I never would have met, even if it is just on camera, that I never would have met before and connected with and could ask questions of. And it's just been a really great thing for me personally. It's grown my confidence. And I know when I started podcasting, and I still get this way every once in a while. Sometimes I'd be like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I'm interviewing so-and-so. He or she knows so much more about this topic than I do. And oh my goodness, this person's above me and I'm going to look like a fool. Sometimes those types of thoughts invade my head. And it's definitely a lot less than it used to be. But sometimes I'll work with somebody and they're like, oh my gosh, it's so weird hearing your voice and actually seeing you on camera because I'm so used to hearing you on the podcast. And you do get that little bit of, I do when I'm interviewing people I get a little starstruck, really, like, I'm not going to lie, every once in a while. And I've tried to move past that and say, okay, they're just another person, Shanna. They're just like you. They're another human being, and remember that. And I will say it's hard. It's hard to do podcast interviews because you really have to listen to what your guest is saying. Sorry, my dog just about knocked over my ring light. Oh, and if you're watching on YouTube, she is shaking my desk like crazy. Little sidebar, she's very, very sick with dementia and mental issues. And we actually have to put her down in not too long. So anyway, wow, that was quite the distraction there, Scout. If you've ever seen a dog with dementia, it's really, really crazy. But anyway, I think I was saying that, sometimes you can feel a little starstruck, but I've really moved past that. And, they're just people like you and I. But I've worked with people who have said that to me as well. And it's always kind of a strange feeling because I just feel like I'm just this small town Wisconsin girl from rural Wisconsin. I grew up in a city of about 10,000 people and meeting all of these really amazing people. But I've learned so much from podcasting as well. So it has affected my personal life. And some of the things that I've learned, I was always a pretty clean lifestyle, even before I started podcasting, but there's some things that I've really cleaned up because of what I've learned from podcast guests and their literature, their books. And, I wouldn't have known about, I'm sure I would have heard about some of these books and authors and people that I've met, but not all of them. So it's really been cool to be able to meet all of those people, and it has trickled over into my personal life for sure. Okay, next question, and I hope that I get a little ADD sometimes, but I hope that my dog interrupting that didn't completely. I feel like I was in a train of thought that I couldn't come back to, but anyway, maybe I'll think of it later. Okay, so next question. How long does it take to produce a podcast from start to finish? This is a good question. And as I alluded to earlier, when I started my business and I started podcasting, it was just me. I'm just like, all right, I'm going to start a podcast. I purchased a course on how to start a podcast and how to grow it and, what to do and all of that. And that's it. I just learned from this course and I started putting podcast episodes out, and I did all my show notes. I did all of the creatives and the graphics for it. And it was a lot of work. Usually I like to record somewhere around an hour, somewhere in between 45 minutes and an hour, but that's just the recording. So when you look at prep time plus recording time, plus then I do my own editing still. I do my podcast editing because I learned how to do that early on. And I feel like it's not that big of a deal. My guests are so well-spoken and, have done a lot of interviews typically that I don't need to do a lot of editing. The only editing I need to do is add an intro and, some of my promos and talk about those types of things. And then of course, upload the actual interview. But I like to record around 45 minutes to an hour, the prep time, the actual recording time, and then the editing and the uploading time for me takes about 3 hours typically, as a rough estimate. And then my assistant Keely now does my show notes. And I love that she does the show notes because she's wonderful. She's studying to be a naturopathic doctor, and they're helpful for her because they're topics that she often hasn't heard a whole lot about and can listen to and learn from. And she's so good at what she does. And she, every time she's like, oh, Shanna, I'm done with the show notes. The podcast has been uploaded. I barely have to tweak anything. I mean, she's very good at what she does and is always, happy and chipper. I'm going to, at some point, I know I'm going to lose her to her studies when she actually goes out into the work world full time. She's a full-time college student right now. I'm really going to miss her, but she does all my show notes. She gets the links ready, and she also produces my graphics for me now and my artwork that we use for each episode. And so I would say and it's different. The prep work is a little bit different. Like if I'm doing a solo episode or I'm doing a Q&A episode or a hot topic episode, I don't have as much prep work to do. I'm to the point where I just rattle down the questions and I hit the record button and I go, and I don't really need to edit anything. But if I'm doing, the prep work, the recording time, the editing, and then for Keely to do her show notes and her graphics, I would say we're up to about 6 hours. And then of course the promoing it. So a good 6 hours per episode. So there is a lot that goes into podcasting and doing it very regularly and putting it out. And it's a free resource, and you can listen to 200 episodes of my podcast and know pretty much what to do to get metabolically well without even working with me directly. So it's a wonderful resource. So yeah, about 6 hours per podcast episode. And when I first started, I did not have any sponsorship. Obviously, people aren't going to sponsor you when you're starting a brand new podcast and you have 0 listeners. And so I would say the sponsorship has just come in the last year or so. And that helps with my time and me paying my team, and that sort of thing. Oh, and I forgot to say, I also have another a team member, Rowan, who does my YouTube videos. So he takes my long form. I record on Zoom, and he takes my long form and he edits it and he puts all the captions in, and then he uploads it into YouTube. On my YouTube channel so that you can watch it there if you want. So I guess that's, he's watching all the episodes and captioning them. So that's another hour. So it's probably more like 7, even 8 hours. So that's why sponsorship, I know sometimes people get annoyed, like, oh, there's so many commercials in here. There's so many promos, but really when you're looking at podcasting, if you're listening to like people who put regular podcasts out, it can be 6 to 8 hours of time that's going into that one episode that you're getting for free. So the sponsorship does become important for me to be able to continue to bring you all of these podcast guests and all of this wonderful resource. So there is a lot that goes into the podcast that you probably don't even think about. And then of course there's the promo part of it where we're promoting it in my newsletter, we're promoting it on Instagram. And I'm actually going to be developing an Instagram page just for the podcast. So you can go and find all the episodes really easily if you want to. And then Rowan also makes me short clips that are around 1 minute long, of each podcast. And I would like to make better use of those and make sure that those are utilized how they should be. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into every single episode. All right. So the next question is, if you could record with a family member, who would it be and why? And I thought about this one too, because there's a lot of family members that have some interesting stories and backgrounds and health issues. And at first I was like, oh, I would interview my daughter, Paige, because she's gone through a lot with her PCOS and struggles with acne, and she's done a huge gut protocol, and she's just so compliant. And she's still we've done a lot, and she's come a long way. And oh my gosh, that girl, like I said, she's 21 and she's been so compliant for the last 3 years. But she still struggles we're still bringing her cortisol and melatonin into balance. It's improving, but it is stubborn. So I first thought her, but then I thought, no, I would interview my mom. My mom passed in February, and I remember it was Mother's Day 2023. And I thought, I want to bring, because my mom was struggling with fatty liver at that point. And I was going to doctor visits with her, and she had lost quite a bit of weight with implementing intermittent fasting. And she was still having health issues, but had improved. Like her blood sugars had improved. Her A1C had improved, her hemoglobin A1C. And so I'm like, Mom, let's do a Mother's Day episode. But I had only given her like a week or two, and we just never got it on the schedule. And I'm like, oh, I'll do it next year. After Mother's Day passed, I'm like, oh, I'll do it next year. And of course, then she was diagnosed with liver cancer or pancreatic cancer that spread to her liver in July of that same year, July of 2023, and passed away in February of 2024. We never even got to Mother's Day. So that's one thing I have a regret about. I wish I would have got her on and had that for me as a good memorial, and I could go back and listen to that episode and hear her voice. And that would have been a really special episode. So I kick myself for that, but you always think you're going to have time, and you can do it the next time, or, like I thought, oh, I'll do it next Mother's Day. And then she wasn't here. So I do wish that I could have interviewed her, and just her life was interesting because she was a nurse, and all the circadian stuff that I'm talking about now with lighting, and how artificial blue light causes breast cancer and increases your risk of cancer because it suppresses melatonin, and melatonin is cancer suppressing. And so I look at her lifestyle, and all the dots connect. And of course, I didn't know this even when she was ill last fall. I didn't know about all the lighting stuff. And so I don't know if any of those changes would have helped her. She was, her liver disease was really far advanced by that point. But I look at her lifestyle as a nurse, working nights, working, all different shifts when I was little and growing up, and the fast paced, and, working in a hospital under very bright lights and lots of blue light. And I know a lot of, after she retired, she had a lot of issues sleeping and didn't sleep well. And so she'd stay up, and she would be on her phone, or she'd be on a tablet reading or whatever, watching TV to try to get to sleep. And of course, that was making everything worse. But I do wish I would have taken the time. And I even remember sending her, like, being official with it, and sending her the link to get, pick a time. So then she'd have a Zoom link and for an interview. And, we could and I thought, oh, maybe we'll do it together. Like, I'll go to her house and we'll do a recording. And it just, like, I sent her the link, and we just never got it on the books. But anyway, take advantage of, don't put things off. Love the people that you have with you right now, because you might not get the chance at a later date. So that's who I would have interviewed for sure. Okay. Next question. What are your family members like your immediate family? And do they listen to your podcast? I love this question too. So my husband, Adam, we've been married for 23 years. We got married in June 2001. So we've been married for 23 years. I've been with him since 1997. So we've been together for 27 years, 27 and a half years, actually. And he listens to the podcast on occasion. If I send him an episode and I say, you need to listen to this, even if you just listen to part of it, please listen to this episode. And so what he does for work, I've never really talked about it on the podcast, but he manages the teams in Wisconsin in the Madison area and the Fox Valley area, which is around Green Bay. So it's he's like, I think he's considered East Central and Southern Wisconsin. He trains the robotic teams, and manages the robotic teams for robotic surgery. with Intuitive Surgical is who he works for. And so they have developed the robotic surgery technology. So he used to be a rep for that, where he would be in with the surgeons and training the surgeon. And now he manages the teams in central and southern Wisconsin. So he is very busy, works a lot of hours. He does listen to podcasts. He listens to a lot of like talk radio too. It's what he likes to listen to. And so he's in the health space. He's got a biology and chemistry degree, but I always say, like, I'm trying to keep people out of getting robotic surgery, but if they have to get surgery, that's a great option, because the time in the hospital is so much shorter. But yeah, he's very busy and works a lot of hours. I'd say 50 hours at minimum, pretty much every week. He does some traveling, and he loves to hunt and fish, and he loves to be outside. So I got that going. Like, he loves to be outside. We like to do things outdoors together. He's a huge hunter. Our son's name is Hunter. And in fact, when I'm recording this, he's out in Colorado for the week hunting elk. So the last time I was traveling with him to our son's volleyball tournament, he put on a podcast. I'm thinking, what the heck is he going to play? And it was all about elk hunting. So I was like, are you kidding me? I said, you're really going to make me listen to this? And he's like, oh, you might learn something. It's so good. And so anyway, he's got some interest in the things that I teach, but he does think I'm kind of a nut job sometimes too. Like when I have my blue blockers on, when I'm putting the red light on, like some of these things, he's just like, oh my goodness, what are you doing now? So I try to teach him in little steps. But they ask questions, I answer. And then we have 3 children. Paige, at the time of this recording, is 21. Hunter is 19 and Sam is 16. So I have a girl and 2 boys. And Paige, again, like, she will listen to the episodes that I send her and to say, this is a really good one for you to listen to. The medical jargon and, some of the experts are a little above her, and she gets, a little frustrated with that, because she's a college student, but she's in education. So she doesn't have like the physiology background and the medical background, but she will listen. And, she likes it when things are dumbed down to a level that she can understand. So I, as a practitioner, I always try to do that, because I know there's a lot of people who aren't in the medical field and don't understand all of the jargon and don't have the background. So I think that that's an art form in and of itself, is just teaching in a way that people can understand. And then Hunter, my 19-year-old, he has just started to listen to a couple of episodes, because I did a couple episodes on his story. He's the one, Hunter was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis the week he turned 11, and he's now 19. So he's been through the ringer with that digestive disease and getting that in remission and staying in remission. He's been in remission for about 4 years, I believe. He's been in remission, but he went through hell in like middle school. So he went back, and I did his podcast episodes a couple of years ago. And of course I got permission from him at the time. But he's just started to kind of listen to some of it too. And again, he doesn't, other than what I've talked about with him, with his disease state, I don't even want to call it disease state, with his underlying symptoms that are caused by an infection for him. It's kind of beyond him too. So I'm glad that the podcast is there, and they can look back at it at some point and learn if they want to. And then Sam, who's 16, of course, wants nothing to do with my podcast. And he's still in the thralls of his friends making fun of me, and they assume I'm vegan because of what I do. And it's just kind of funny that they think that. And of course, they think dietitians are vegetarian and vegan. So, but I think I even asked him one time, we were on our way to school before he could drive, because now he can drive. So I don't talk with them as much in the car, but we were driving, and my podcast wasn't playing, but it was like, it was up on my my dash, you could see like I was going to play it when he got out of the car. And I'm like, do you think it's cool that there's a podcast there and you can go learn from it at some point if you ever feel ready? Or, there's like so many episodes, if something happened to me, you can learn from me, even though I'm not here. And he's just like, not really. I was like, oh, fair enough. So that was kind of funny, but, again, in time, it's like what 16-year-old wants to listen to, and, a podcast about metabolic health and insulin resistance and, circadian rhythm and all this stuff. So I just try to model the behavior, have the resources available to my kids. But so far, my first two, they're not real interested in the medical world and the health world. My daughter is going to be a teacher right now. My son is in recreation management, wants to work for the DNR, and both my husband and I are medical. So I don't know, maybe if we scared them off. So we'll see what Sam does. But so far, yeah, they're not real, like very interested in the podcast. So hopefully at some point they will be. Okay, next question. I like this question too. What episode do you want future grandchildren to listen to? And it's at 200 episodes. Oh my gosh, there's so many amazing episodes and guests to look back on. And so much of the information is critical for long-term good health and to feel well. But for children in particular, actually next week's episode is with Daniel White. And we talk all about the effects of blue light at night on teenagers, because he did a study on teenagers age 13 to 21. And we talk all about that next week, and simple ways to mitigate blue light in teens, because it's a carcinogen. Like, people don't talk about artificial blue light at night being a carcinogen, but it absolutely is. And of course, you'll have to wait for his story. But he was very addicted to video games as a teenager and caused anxiety and insomnia and weight gain and so many issues for him, that he now dedicates his life to, avoiding circadian disruption and what you can do to mitigate blue light. But I think, kids have no idea. Most parents have no idea. Like I said, I just learned this stuff in the last year, but the blue light that we're exposed to all day, every day, or the vast majority of us, staring at phones, playing video games, watching TV, having our, YouTube clips, or having our phone in front of our face and watching YouTube, or not even YouTube. What the heck do those kids watch these days? Gosh, I'm blanking on it, but Snapchat, whatever. TikTok, sorry, I hate TikTok, so I'm never on there, but I know like my boys especially love it, and they love video games, and it's a social thing. Like, video games are social right now. But they're really, really, that blue light is detrimental, so detrimental to our health, and why I'm so passionate about bringing guests on to talk about it, because there's so many easy things you can do to mitigate it. But I think that this generation coming up, this education needs to happen. Our lighting needs to change. We need to switch out these horrible LED and fluorescent lights that are making us sick and destroying our metabolism. People have no idea. But that is a podcast episode that I would love, all the parents and children to listen to, because it's gonna have a profound effect on your health. And it's just, there's simple things that you can do to mitigate that artificial blue light at night. And I also just, a couple days ago, I'm not sure exactly when his episode is coming out, but I just interviewed Dr. Martin Moore-Eady, who is the Light Doctor. His book is called The Light Doctor, and he's, decades of research behind circadian health and circadian rhythm and circadian disruption. And he and his team actually discovered the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the hypothalamus in the brain. That's the master timekeeper of the human body. So he'll be coming on in the next couple of weeks as well. But those episodes are really important. And I think Daniel does a good job of explaining in a way and working with children in a way that they get it. And children, like, if something makes them feel better, they're going to do it. I think maybe adults, in my age bracket and older, you get a little stubborn about these things. You're like, how can watching TV at night increase my risk of cancer? Like, really, how can this increase my risk of diabetes? But the literature is there, the studies are there. We are just stubborn as a culture with adopting this and change, simple things. The lighting industry is billions and billions of dollars. And so it's going to take some change, but that episode's coming out next week. And I would definitely point my grandchildren toward that episode. And hopefully by the time my grandchildren are grown, things will have changed and things will not have gotten worse. Let's hope for that for sure. All right, next question, just a couple questions left and then we'll wrap up. How has your health How has your health journey influenced topics covered on the podcast? Longtime listeners know that my health journey has influenced this podcast hugely. And, when I say that, I feel a little self-absorbed, a little self-focused. But when something happens to you or you go through some sort of change or journey, you're just so much more equipped to talk about that topic. So I, of course, developed insulin resistance probably in my 20s. I probably started to develop circadian disruption in my teens and 20s. And that manifested itself as metabolic disease as well. I didn't know it until, very recently, but that insulin resistance was brewing for a really long time because I followed the traditional guidelines that are terrible and actually make us metabolically ill. The food guide pyramid, eating all the time, all of the things that we talk about on the podcast, snacking. And then, of course, the blue light and the lighting environment and sitting a lot of the day for my job. So that was, that perpetuated my insulin resistance. And of course, then I got into intermittent fasting and I got into therapeutic carb restriction, and I was able to reverse my insulin resistance for the most part. But then I started to have high blood sugars in the morning and I struggled with my adrenal fatigue moving into adrenal exhaustion. And of course, my course Cortisol Calm is coming out. Enrollment opens on September 30th, and that course starts on October 14th. But if this has happened to you and you're feeling like, oh my gosh, I have cortisol issues and adrenal fatigue, make sure to get on the wait list. Well, I'll have Keely, my wonderful assistant Keely, put that in the show notes. It's fasttoheal.info/CC waitlist. But anyway, I then developed pretty severe adrenal exhaustion and was feeling a ton of symptoms from that this spring when my mom passed and all of the things. And then my dad got sick and we had to move him to assisted living and clean out their house. That was just a really trying time. And it was during that time where it's the time period from after my mom died and moving my dad and getting their house cleaned out that I was able to recover from adrenal fatigue and adrenal dysfunction, I'll call it. And it was a very stressful time. I didn't use medications. I didn't use supplements. And I just used my circadian rhythm and my circadian health and reestablishing the pathway, my HPA axis, my hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the signaling to and from that. And that's really how you fix adrenal exhaustion and adrenal dysfunction. But anyway, of course, you guys have followed me through this whole journey. And of course, when I learn new things, I want everyone to know about them because I feel like if I'm living my lifestyle with my nutrition pretty dialed in for my whole life, like I've never been a junkie eater. And I know a ton about nutrition after studying it for 25 years. If I have my nutrition reined in, I've always been active. And I'm pretty healthy overall, but if I'm struggling with these issues, there are a whole ton of people struggling with these issues. And so I feel like I need to talk about it, and I don't want to hide under a rock and say, oh, well, okay, now what I was doing may have perpetuated some cortisol issues, but I got to keep talking about what I was talking about, because how in the heck do I make this pivot? And it's hard, but I got to stay true to myself, and I got to bring you the information that I know is going to be helpful and truly heal you. So definitely that, all my podcast guests now, I shouldn't say all of them, but a lot of them are revolving around circadian health and our lighting, because it's so, so important. And that is really what's perpetuating metabolic disease. So if we don't talk about it, we're doing ourselves a disservice, and, we're not getting to the root cause of all of our metabolic dysfunction. So definitely my health journey has definitely influenced the podcast guests and what I talk about here on this platform. Okay, 2 more questions and we'll wrap up. How do you stay motivated and disciplined when it comes to health? I feel like, a lot of people have asked me, like, don't you get sick of just eating healthy? Don't you just want to eat junk? And of course, we're going back to just the whole nutrition thing, because people think that that is the end all be all for good health. And every once in a while, I'm like, oh, I would really like to eat some cookies, or, I'd really like to just drink a regular Coke or whatever it is. But I don't, because I know how it makes me feel. And I know that if I'm not one of these people who, if I eat something out of the ordinary for me, that I'm like, get into this whole funk, then I can't get back to healthy habits. That's not me at all. I feel like I've been doing this for so long that if I don't do it, I don't feel myself. And I think for a lot of people who have felt crappy for so long, don't know what it's like to feel good and have good health. So they don't know what they're missing out on. Where I've felt good for the most part, I've definitely had, some issues here and there, but for the most part, I've felt good for so long with these approaches that if I detour, I feel like crap and I don't like it. Like it's not worth it for me. Like alcohol is a good example. I haven't touched alcohol in a year and a half. And I don't even think like, oh, when's the day I'm going to have an alcoholic drink? Like that doesn't cross my mind, because I know how I feel if I drink, and I know I'm going to sleep like crap. And it's at this point, it's not important to me anymore. That's just an example. I'm not placing any I'm not placing any judgment on anybody, but I just stay disciplined because I don't feel good if I don't. So anyway, and that motivates me to keep going with what I'm doing. Like me feeling good is enough of a motivator. And it's like one day of an activity is enough for me. And like, I just don't feel good. So that motivates me to keep going. So it's not hard for me to stay motivated and disciplined, because I've been in this lifestyle for so long. And I just, I try to adapt simple things little by little and get used to it, and it becomes a routine. And then, I stay motivated that way. Okay. Last question. What's something you wish you knew earlier in your health journey? And again, I'd go back to the circadian and light piece, because I learned that way late. And I feel like if I would have known that, and nobody knew it, right? It's like the suprachiasmatic nucleus was just discovered in the 80s. I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, so nobody knew about this stuff. But if I would have known about how light affects your health, and artificial versus, sunlight, if I would have known that earlier on, I feel like my insulin resistance would have been a whole lot different. And I don't think I would have ever developed the adrenal issues that I developed, even with, having 3 kids. And so my adrenal issues really started to compound when I was having children and not sleeping, and just that whole, I look back and I'm like, there's years of my life that I barely remember. That's terrible. But I had 3 children in 5 years. Plus, if I count being pregnant with Paige, it was 6 years of being pregnant, nursing, having children. So I had 3 children in 5 years, breastfed all of them for a year. So it really wasn't a whole lot of time in between for me to recover. So it was after my third child, like things just compounded and I had some really, I really struggled with my health for a few years there. And I don't feel like I fully recovered from everything until very recently with adapting the circadian approaches and, really being mindful of the different types of light, artificial lighting, blocking the artificial light at night so I can sleep. So that's, people, let's go back to square one. Like why I even talk about that? People might think, well, it's so that you have your circadian rhythm. Like, no, the reason why you are suppressing that blue light at night is because it's very stimulating to cortisol and it suppresses melatonin. Melatonin is so important for your health, and you won't produce melatonin or you won't produce as much as you should if you have bright lights in your environment. And if you're staying up till all hours, you're going to bed really late, you have blue light in your eyes until late, your melatonin is not going to peak till way later after you've been in the dark. And some people sleep with their lights on and it's crazy. And I get it. It's like maybe for safety reasons, but if I would have known how much light it affects us, I mean, really, it's what keeps our whole body in check. Is our circadian rhythm, our circadian health, and that light, the light signals that are coming into our eyes and our skin. So I wish I knew that earlier, I think, but of course it's now, coming to light, pun intended. But we are really learning a lot about it. And I think, in the last 20 years, everything has just been compounded because we are on screens and tablets and phones and TVs and TikTok and Netflix and all of the things, our computers, until late at night and in the evening, like we never were before. And so that's just changed the game of everything. So we look at our health, the health crisis that we're in. And yes, food plays a big role, but so does circadian disruption and circadian health and the type of lighting that you are suscepting your eyes, your skin, your whole body to. So I do wish that I knew that sooner. So let's wrap up. I hope that this episode has been helpful for you. Again, I got these questions. I just started rambling off the cuff. So I hope you learned a little bit about me, my family, why I'm here, why I keep putting this podcast out. If you love this podcast episode, share it with a family member, share it with someone you love. When you share episodes, that really helps my podcast to grow. I want as many people as possible listening to these episodes so that they can take control of their own health and they can optimize their metabolism. So share it. If you feel so inclined to go and leave me a rating and review, especially on Apple Podcasts, that really helps to give the podcast a boost as well. I know it's, just one thing that you don't have time for, but it literally takes 30 seconds to scroll down on Apple. If you're listening on Apple, rate it with stars and then just write a sentence or two. That really, really helps me out, gives my podcast a boost and helps others. Now you kind of know what goes into podcasting and producing a podcast episode. That really would help me out. And thanks so much for listening. You're why I'm here. I would not keep putting these podcast episodes out if no one was listening. So thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. I'll see you back next week for another episode.